That's all. Okay. All right, calling to order the Rules and Policies Committee meeting of Wednesday, April 9th, 2025. Let the record show that Councilors Cushing and Fellows are here. We hope to see Councilor Doherty at some point. The next item on the agenda is public comment. I don't see any members of the public in attendance here. Do we have anyone online? No. Okay, so close that. Item 4 is approval of the minutes from the January 29th, 2025 meeting. Motion. Guess I'll second that. Any discussion? No. Favor? That's approved. The first action item, item number 5 on the agenda, chapter 302, agenda format and due dates. So, as folks know, this relates to sort of shifting the agenda so that we can have the standing and special committee reports and liaison reports happen earlier in the meeting. Okay, all right. And here is Councilor Doherty. Welcome. There we go. So we are, I was just introducing item number 5 on the agenda, the chapter 302 agenda format and due dates. As we know from council discussion in the last few meetings, what we've done is our chair has put forward a motion at each meeting to move the standing special committee reports and liaison reports up further in the agenda instead of having them toward the very end, where they have been, at least historically recently. Based on the rationale that we want to sort of raise the visibility of that, and that tends to be when more folks are in the audience and following along. So it's pretty straightforward. There's a red line that's up on the screen there that shows where that would move. That would come right after the town manager's report, which seems logical to me. So I would move approval of that recommendation to forward to the town council. Second, any discussion on that? All in favor? Yep. All right. Hear that, thank you. Item number 6, chapter 302A, roles of staff and town council liaisons to committees.
Councilor Coles.
Yes.
The due dates is also part of item number 5.
Oh, thank you.
Kristen, can you speak that a little bit bigger?
Does say agenda format and due dates.
Kristen, is this our recommendation, staff recommendation?
Yes. Came from Tony.
What are we recommending?
Would you mind giving a brief introduction of that and the rationale behind that recommendation?
Yeah, certainly. So essentially this would be to move when items are due to the town clerk's office, including Tony, to set agendas. They're in the charter, they need to be posted a week ahead of time, which that means staff needs some time to compile the documents and get everything together to make the agenda. So this is just changing the dates a little bit because of that, and the fact that now we are closed on Fridays. And then adding a part where if there's a public notice or public hearing in action, to change those dates as well.
Okay.
Doesn't change my vote.
That seems logical to me. I don't know how sort of parliamentary we need to get about this, given that we already voted on the motion.
Because we skipped over that.
Is what, yeah,
I may suggest a separate motion
Okay.
to advance the proposed changes to section 1.
sure, just for purposes of clarity and avoidance of doubt. So I move to approve that recommended revision regarding the due dates.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah. Just clarification of it was a week and now it might be less than a week, but they'll have them out or what?
No, this is for when we documents need to be turned into the town clerk's office. So an example would be if planning has something that they need on the agenda when we get their documents by. so we can get the agenda to you guys in a timely manner.
Oh, okay, so it's their time to get them there on time, not delaying and making it only the people have it available to them 2 days before, so.
We want to try to make it available to the public sooner than,
Right, okay, great, yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, I do remember this coming up at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
No brainer.
all right, all in favor then?
Yep.
Right, that one's approved. Thank you. Thanks for highlighting that. So item number 6, chapter 302A, roles of staff and town council liaisons to committees. This and the next action item, at least as far as I'm concerned, are, they're not really, I wouldn't anticipate that we would take any action this evening. They really are just sort of starting the ball rolling on some thought and some discussion on any potential revisions. So, and I'm, as you know, relatively new to the council, and as I really, 3 of us are, I guess probably the 3 newest members of the council. But my general understanding, and maybe staff can speak to this, but my understanding is that the traditionally or historically the councilors' roles on as members of committees and liaisons to committees and boards has been somewhat ad hoc. There really haven't been any hard rules or many hard rules around attendance, and there are guidelines on quorums and things like that. But so this really was a notion of trying to kind of lay out some standard consistent expectations around councilor participation on these boards and committees. I'm really fairly, personally, I'm somewhat agnostic about which way we in the committee and the council might go on this. And I think, I'm open to thoughts on this.
To me, I think we have a bigger problem with committees than the role of the councilors of the committees. My experience here is that the committees tend to be made up of a very homogeneous group of folks who clearly have an agenda. And that what furthers that is they get a liaison with the committee who shares that agenda. And that things come forward to this council that don't reflect what I would call balanced deliberation at the committee level. And then they end up here for this council to sort out. And then this council is generally swings to favor things coming up from the committee. And so consequently, the work, things just sort of flow through. And that, I look, we have a nominating committee, a couple of councilors there. But that doesn't strike me as generating any real balance. And so, and compounding that is that the town is not really paying attention. And so there is a real danger here. I think this is a recorded statement that things are going to get way out of whack and out of balance. And as you all well know, I had some recent experience with that. Lack of what I think is balance on many of those issues. And I'm not really sure how to change it. We began to discuss that at the goal setting meeting, where we started to say we need to push these goals down. And I thought that made a lot of sense. In fact, I think that I was an advocate for that, and I still am. But then the issue becomes when the goals are broad and they put a lot of things on the list. which ones do we pick first? You will recall in the goal-setting meeting that I thought that it was a mistake to lead off with becoming a tree city. And yet shortly, you will all be deliberating about becoming a tree city, as per Councilor Shute's report at the last meeting. And I still don't quite know what that means, but I have been trying over a long period of time to ring the gong to say that we are starting to see a shift out of balance. And so addressing what councilors are supposed to do at committee meetings, it is rearranging deck chairs. And the place where you start seeing it rolling across the country, you see it in property tax revolts, you see it in just saying no to everything stuff. And the problem here is that, in my personal experience, when you attempt to bring it on balance, you don't have a room full of people showing up supporting that view. But what you do have is you have a room full of, we see this consistently, where we see on the land law issue last time, fill up the room with people who love the land acquisition. We don't have any, it almost feels bad, like you're some other political, you're from some other political planet if you say, well, excuse me, but I didn't think it was a bad thing for a councilor to be able to ask questions of a representative until that councilor was satisfied with the answers. Okay, didn't feel good getting cut off in the middle of that conversation. So I'm going to stop there, but I wanted to make sure that there was a record of this statement, because I think somehow the town needs to figure out a way to get more balance in the discussion of the grassroots level. Because we are a diverse community, and based on our history, what I've seen in my short time here is that diversity is now reflected in our choices over this time. So, end of speech. But that's how I feel.
Thank you. I appreciate you articulating all that.
I get all that.
Thank you.
The recording did.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I've been saying that right along. I have many people I've talked to, a lot of people I know personally that just gave up even voting. They were so discouraged. They say we come up, we come to these things and they give us 3 minutes to speak, and we speak, and then they just do what they're gonna do. And it just happens. And and I tell them, I said, you can't keep it done. There's something done. I ain't voting, I ain't doing anything. There's no point in it. You go and vote and it gets done anyway, and they do what they're gonna do. So that's what it is. It's a lot of people are discouraged with it. And the committees are special interest groups, and so somebody that wants something, they get on the committee and they push for it. And just because the committee wants it, doesn't mean it's the majority in town wants it. And that's what's happening with this, is they spent all this time, and it's too bad because they spent all these hours working at these committees trying to, get this thing together. And they finally, if it has to go to referendum, the people just say no, it's like, no, we don't want it. And they're like, well, where'd that come from? Well, they weren't here. Well, they just said, we're not gonna bother with that anymore. We're just gonna go and vote no. It happened to me personally, obviously, and with the harbor thing. I came here at the meeting and I get the agenda there. I looked through the agenda, I didn't see anything. The agenda said harbor meeting. I was here, there ain't no harbor meeting here tonight, but the way they worded it, there was nothing. nothing there saying about a fee for, the dock at Pine Point, nothing in the agenda. And now when I'm on the council, I see that the agenda is the one page with all the mumbo jumbo. And they have the in-depth explanation on the other pages. And there was people in the audience who get up and say, they even said, how come, our agenda doesn't sound like what you guys are talking about? And the town manager and the chairman at the time, a year or so ago, they said, oh, no, we got the same agenda we got. And I get here, it's like, no, you don't, it's very in-depth. So the thing that they hand out at the door should be a very, layman's term, point blank to the point, food trucks, there should be two words in there, food truck. When we had the food truck, there was nothing in there about a food truck. It was, all these numbers and initials and letters, and we're gonna talk about this, and public doesn't know what's going on.
That's
So, and I don't know, did the harbor committee meet last night?
Coastal Waters did, Shellfish,
Yeah, see, I missed that one again. I had your holy grail that you gave me, and I had it right next to my chair that I sit in every night. And my wife thought it was trash and threw it away.
well,
So I tried looking up on the computer and the meetings weren't on. I couldn't get on, on there, and the meetings listed online.
So they'd be on the-
yeah, they were on the calendar and
Because at one time
Coastal's
I
page.
found a calendar, it was the whole month, and I got to that and it was just a blank. It's like, usually it's all listed, all the committees for the whole month. Is that just at the first of the month that's up?
No, though we update it every time there's a change.
I don't know why I couldn't. find it.
takes
Yeah.
a while to get used to
But,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I couldn't get it. I didn't.
Well,
So, yeah, I mean, obviously, I guess I should have been on the harbor committee, a year or so ago and see what was going on and what was happening. I just, as I've made it very clear how I feel about it, I mean, these are taxes, and I said it at the last meeting about. It just seems like you can't do it, unless you pay the town, you grease the town's palm, and then you can do this, you can have a job. With me, they tell me, they say, if you don't pay your mooring fee, we're gonna confiscate your mooring, you're all done, lobster, you're not gonna go anywhere. It's like, and Darren's down at the people down there parking cars and telling them, you can't do that, we're gonna fine you $3,000 if you do this, and it's like. This has been going, these people have been doing this for 30 or 40 years, now all of a sudden, he has the authority to get in and tell them they can't.
Well, I mean, there are ordinances, and I think
Right,
that's,
so they
that's
go
a-
by the
that's a-
ordinance and they have a parking lot ordinance.
I think
for
that's a discussion for
McDonald's.
another.
For McDonald's, just saying, this is what it's about,
You-
this is
you-
what it's on.
You've expressed
Yeah, yeah,
you very clearly expressed your position on that,
yeah.
including at full council meetings.
Yeah,
I
so
appreciate
don't
it.
know what this means as far as, telling me I have to go to this or whatever, if I miss it, whatever. You're gonna be booted off the council, I don't know what your terms are gonna come to.
First of all, this is not coming from me
Right,
personally.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
This was,
Yeah.
Who
Who did it come from?
Can you give some background?
Sure,
Yeah,
please, thank you.
Yeah.
So what's before you this evening is, really there was no, and I've heard this come up over the last few years, through councilor comments about what is really the role of a council liaison, what is the expectation? And I think that various liaisons handle it differently. I think some council liaisons to committees are very involved and work collaboratively with the chair to set agendas and things like that. Others, I think, are much more passive participants. And so what's before you, to Councilor Fellows' point, is an opening foray into what that might look like. And so the effort here is to define what the role of the council liaison to the committees would be. There is an expectation in there around attendance of those proceedings. Just for some additional background, that attendance standard is the same standard required of the actual committee. So if that feels too rigorous or too onerous, that's again up for this committee to deliberate on. But that's where that standard around 75%, or you can't miss so many meetings, otherwise there might be consequences. That's where that comes from, is 302A. And then in what is proposed to be 203.4.c is just actually having a list of what those liaison assignments are, because there is currently no list. This is the list that we've largely worked off of over the last few years. Many of those committees are standing committees, some of them are more specialized. Sometimes we have liaisons outside organizations that aren't even municipal organizations. And so this was simply an effort to, every year when we talk about assigning those liaisons, what are we talking about? And so that's really more of a housekeeping. So that's the background for those 3 items. Absolutely at this committee's kind of mercy for what you want to do with it. But that's the background for it.
So I have just one thought specifically about that. The language says that the liaison will be a conduit. And to my mind, a conduit is a thing you run a piece of wire through. It doesn't interact with the wire. It listens and transports the wire from one end to the other. My fear is if that is actually the intent, that it should become explicit, is to say that the role of the liaison is to observe and listen and report and not to participate. So
I think
when
that's
I go, when I went to the chamber meeting, I didn't feel it was, you all probably know by now, not at a loss for thoughts on things, but I did not feel like it was my role in that. In Eco Maine, it's a different deal. You're a board member and there is an expectation, but you know what a board member does. It's different than a liaison. So I would say that whether or not people abide by that is another story. Clearly, if you are a counselor who has an agenda, who is the liaison to the committee for which is generating the stuff that supports your agenda, then that gives you an inordinate amount of power to influence the deliberations of that committee to further your own personal agenda.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's a valid point, and I think that's a very valid topic of discussion. That sort of whether there should be explicit language and explicit expectations around what a council liaison does, and whether they should just be sort of. And I would personally tend to lean toward what you were saying, Don, that should not necessarily be there as a champion or an active advocate for something. I know in the relatively limited experience I've had being liaison of long range planning and the planning board, I do particularly, planning board is different because it's sort of its own thing, like, its own very rigorous processes, sort of just basically just listening, and I'm prepared and available if there are questions, and this has happened at long range planning in my experience. If I'm in the room, I can sometimes chime in just to say, FYI, the ordinance committee or the full council is planning on looking at this down the road, and this is what the next steps might be. Or this relates to a goal that we established. It's more about providing context and not.
It sounds like a conduit.
So it is a conduit in both directions. It's a conduit in both. You're there as a representative of the council. Not, you're obviously not voting, and to me anyway, I tend to agree with you that you're also preferably not like actively weighing in on the merits of something, because then it feels like you're maybe putting your thumb on the scale. Because you're right, there is a tendency, and I think it's understandable and in some ways laudable. There is a tendency for the council to be deferential toward boards and committees. We saw that a lot during the wetlands discussions. That was a recurring theme there, that, oh, this is working its way through these different committees and they've looked at it. And so I think that it is, so I do think that it's perfectly appropriate to think about how to frame that in terms of attendance, to the extent we want to think about that. I personally, I'd be open to, and again, we're not planning to decide anything here today, but my personal gut feeling is particularly for liaison, I see liaison role is fundamentally different from being on a committee. And some boards and committees are more active than others, and to me, 75% feels a little, maybe a little onerous, particularly, depending on your circumstances, and I worry that could dissuade people discourage people from participating. It may not be realistic, and it also might discourage people who may be considering getting involved, possibly running for council. They hear, oh, you're spending all this time. I mean, it is a commitment, and people should know that going in, but so I think there's some kind of a balance to be struck there, to the extent that even is a continued discussion. So I just wanted to throw
Again,
that out
it's
there.
like Augusta, it's, they have their job, they're legislators, and they're there, and they're just continuously trying to pass laws and do things, and it just, why are we doing this? Why do we even have the committees? I mean, I know you want to stay in touch with the people, and that is a way, that's how it came about, I'm sure, was to get people to have input. So you do have your committees and stuff, but I want to go there and I want to tell them, no, I've been in the harbor all my life. No, this isn't going to be, you just moved here last year and you wanted to, do some contribution to your town. And you've been here for 1 year, so you said, oh, I'm going to get on the committee and I'm going to do a good thing. And they well intentions, but they have no idea what they're doing.
I think there's people can debate and have different opinions about how sort of representative or quote unquote balanced that some of the committees are. I think the makeup, from what I've seen, is pretty diverse. Got people who've been in town for a long time, people who haven't been.
Right.
And I do think that a lot of the impetus, my sense of it anyway, is that a lot of the impetus behind committee activities and roles and participation is because there's been this hue and cry at times of, we want to have more of a seat at the table. The town doesn't listen. And so, and we have the form of government we have elected representatives. And so it's a vehicle for being kind of a conduit, to use that word again, between voters and the representatives that they elect. And it's an imperfect form of government, like almost pretty much every form of government is, but it's what we have. And so I would hope we can kind of work within that. I think there are maybe some valid questions around, how can the nomination process be fine-tuned? There are term limits now. There's some overlap, I think, between this group and appointments and nomination, which I also have to sit on now. In terms of, right, how can we try to, and it's never going to be perfect.
Well, I think the first step is to acknowledge that it's worth taking a look at. And I think, and the other is, I really feel like strengthening the role as a liaison. And I would add to that, with respect to attending meetings, I was the liaison to the school last year. Now, April and Nick basically appointed themselves to the building committee, so on and so forth, which is all fine. But when I was doing my liaison, I would pick up the phone and I would call my counterpart or vice versa before the various meetings. We would have a conversation about what's going on in the council, what's going on in the school committee. Awesome, we're all good. Thank you very much. I didn't attend a single. I attended school committee meetings when I thought it was appropriate and interesting. But I don't know that there's any that you can be a liaison, perhaps in some respects, better to interface with whoever the chair of the committee is, just to say, prior to the meeting, this is what we're talking about. So you can make an argument, don't attend. Talk to your counterpart. It's like two ambassadors from different countries.
I think that's a fair point. I've done that somewhat with the planning board myself, that are
And then it takes.
It's not always feasible.
Then it takes less time.
Yeah.
Okay, so where do we go from here, Steve?
I mean, I think Councilor Cushing, you raised a good point. I think the point is that either through attendance or through some other coordination with chair of the respective committee or board, or the point is that, and again, I think I've heard this comment from yourself as well, expressing a concern. I think it's a fair one. Expressing concern at times about what that level of communication, interaction, coordination, collaboration is with all of our citizen volunteer committees. And what is going on? How does that information come back from council? The reality is that I think it's a challenge for whether it's a counselor or a staff member. Not all these committees, most of them have staff support, not all of them. But how do we get that information and those updates to stave off the criticism of? And again, I hear it from residents. I hear it from every town councilor that's ever come on. This idea of, I just found out about this. Here it is, a public hearing. Here it is, a second reading. I just found out about this, and it's the constant challenge. Being so close to the communication efforts we have. How do we get people aware, informed, and engaged on issues at the lowest possible level when these things are being formulated and discussed? It's like, I always joke, it's like the old cartoon about how a bill becomes a law. It's like, well, a lot of stuff starts at this committee 18 months ago, 2 years ago. And they had so many meetings about it. Then it went here, and then went here, and then went here. And so there's a lot of work being done. And that this is one area where I feel like at least the legislative body will have, whether directly or through the liaison assigned, we will have some ideas of what's going on in these cases. This is just kind of the vehicle we have, but we don't right now have any expectation or definition for what that role should be. And that's what this.
And that's how it should be. Just leave it the way it is.
I would suggest, and we are going to at some point have a new member of this committee, and I don't think that this is something that is any sort of an emergency. I think it's a good conversation to be having. I would suggest we sort of table it, have the good input that's been given, sort of go be, in the record, so to speak. And we can, there can be continued, consultation with staff about whether it goes anywhere from here, and if so, in what form. One thing I did want to say, Scott, is you have made a good point a couple of times about the way that the agendas read. I definitely get that. I mean, even as a counselor, it sometimes does read. And I understand why it's set up the way it is, and it's got to have the right ordinance references and everything. But maybe something, I'm just throwing it out there, but maybe a possible topic for possible future agenda topic, something for us and maybe the full council at some point to discuss would be whether there could be some modification to the agendas where there's sort of some kind of a little layman's translation. This would allow food trucks in this zone.
Yeah, that's all. It's really some thing. And lately, a few of them have actually said it. When I read it, it's like, oh, I know what's going on. Because a lot of times I don't get the thing beforehand. I don't come to town to get it. So I get here, I just look at it when I get here.
Yeah.
This is the first I've seen it that way there, just like the public. I just come in, it's like, oh, they're doing this tonight. And I just fly
Right,
out.
and then when you layer in the fact that understandably, not everyone, a lot of people don't intuitively understand first reading versus second reading, and sometimes things get a little wonky with that, and then that's before we start splitting the question and having amendments and all the fun parliamentary things. But I think at the very least, there is something to be said for.
That's what I was saying about the reader going, you have a mailing. I mean, that'd be the perfect thing to do, is put the agenda. Meeting and send it a week before the meeting, you said about a week or 5 days before, send that out. And then people actually get it in the mail. Here it is, this is what we're doing at the meeting on Wednesday.
Well,
And, they probably won't attend, but at least they've got the notice.
Right.
And then I don't know what the expense of that would be to send that to every household in town, but how
I
difficult.
just have one other thought of this conversation. And that is that when you look at the structure of the council meetings, we sometimes have workshops, which you would think would be back and forth, but most of the time, their presentations can take a proportion, and that it's, people have their questions and so forth. The one thing that the council never gets to do is talk to each other on a routine basis. Public meeting law forbids that. And so we come here and it's always this kind of communication back and forth, or, you know, sometimes a little debate between people here. My thought would be to look at the agenda, to try to take full form of stuff, non-controversial, concentrated, one meeting a month, and let the world know that if your baseball team needs recognition, if your zoning needs routine updating, all of the kind of functionary stuff that the government needs to do, from business licenses to it's the place where we're creating a breeze, raising our hands saying, please, next item. And then have one meeting a month where there's actual workshopping dialogue between councilors around issues and agenda items facing the town, where people talk to each other, just like we're talking here, independent of Robert's rules and all of that stuff. And then you can segment the meeting back before, you know, first readings and second readings and so forth. And have less. One of the things, this is a little swan song here for me, but one of the things that I found so annoying was that I know it was for the public, okay, but we basically get a rehash of everything that we could have and should have read before we come in, and then it's represented again, and then the time for real back and forth dialogue where you try to understand the issue gets cut short. So there are a whole lot of structural issues which remain in place because this is what we've always done, that they're hard to choose and so forth. So anyway, so I'll just sort of leave that in there to say that government is more effective when the government people actually get a chance to talk to each other in the public forum and explore ideas.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. I didn't expect this big speeches, Tony, but
Yes, well,
see.
go get, don't
Okay.
leave anything on the table, so to speak. I do have another meeting to attend at 6, so we have a few minutes, and this last item, the naming policy similarly is something that there's been some past discussion about. I'm not fully fluent in all the history of it. And just wanted to kind of start the conversation. It may be relevant to the extent that school project gets approved and so we might need a name. And I think the idea was should at least be thinking about having some kind of a transparent process for that. So I don't know, Liam, if you want to, if there's anything you want to say on this.
I'm almost embarrassed to say, I don't fully appreciate all the background here. I know that this is something that has been requested to be discussed and formalized for probably at least 12, if not 18 months. And it's really rooted in, you know, there have been lots of really wonderful people who have moved through our school system in our town, and we don't have any formalized process to consider requests to name areas, parks, fields, facilities after people. So I think this was really driven by, I think, the current Board of Education chair. And, you know, the only thing I'd add is that we do receive these requests on the municipal side as well. There's some bridge or recognizing some other long-term municipal employee who's passed away and left their mark on the community. So I think that's where it's rooted. I haven't thoroughly reviewed this proposal. Maybe that's all of our homework and come back and look at it, but that's the background.
My general understanding as well is that there has been some, and I think part of what we're looking at right now is maybe a rough synthesis of a review that town staff had done of kind of example policies from other places of similar type communities.
Well,
And like, as Liam suggested, I think there's part of the real impetus right now is from the school board in anticipation that there may be something to be named. We'll see how that turns out. I think they get questions and feedback about it. There may be other history that I'm not familiar with, but that's, yeah.
They have done it in the past, I mean, what schools. What?
Yeah, they certainly have been,
Donate a
there's
bunch of money, I assume.
a number of facilities that do bear the name of people that I think what's lacking is a formal established, again, policy or guidelines for how they should be doing it.
All right,
I read it, it made sense to me. I would suggest to you that there is a substantial portion of the chapter in my book devoted to naming things, which I would suggest you read. Whispers of the Universe. Simple choice, an ordinary life. But
speaking of leaving a legacy.
well, beyond that, I don't
Yeah.
think that the reference would be worthy of public discussion, but anyway, I just want to say that I think it does make sense to have some rational approach, because there are a lot of worthy candidates to have something named after them. And for example, someone could try to name something after me, and you might not want that to happen. And so it would be best to have a rational reason to deny. To deny them. Well, just say, in case you're thinking
Sage
about it.
advice.
Yeah. I will say, from having, I've been on the other side of this in housing development where I've had interactions, experiences in communities where this can blow up a little bit, if you're not, that you stumble across a landmine and it turns out that there's some history that you didn't know about, or there's a group that already had a name in mind. And so I do think it is good, would be good to have something that's a kind of a roadmap that can be followed. So it doesn't seem like it's just arbitrary or kind of all behind the scenes sort of thing.
Might want to do background checks.
Yeah, right. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, the unfortunate fact is that naming things after people can sometimes be, fraught.
Especially after you get that big bronze sign made up,
So,
then you do your Google search.
so, yeah. And, we are, and I don't, I think by the same token, we also don't want it to be the sort of thing where and it's auto, or that it's expected or automatic that somebody who gives a lot of money automatically gets something right after them, or that we're selling naming rights.
Yeah.
That actually is something that I have heard floated as like a, spitballing, brainstorming kind of thing. I think in the spirit of how could a town, not even necessarily Scarborough, but when you're budget strapped, oh, maybe we could sell the naming rights.
Oh.
Which I don't personally think is appropriate.
Right.
I think though that is the sort of thing though that could be addressed in a policy, just to lay out the parameters. Anything else? So to be continued on that. Any future agenda items that anyone would want to put on the docket for the future? We talked a little bit about the, possible, layperson translations in the agenda. That might be something to think about going forward.
I think that the role of the chair and co-chair, which should be defined, I think it would be worthwhile. Those things are not written anyway.
That's a good point. I've heard that raised as well.
And secondarily, I think it would be worthwhile to consider a rotating co-chair. And so there are 7 people, we'll divide 52 by 7. And that the co-chair would rotate who for Because they meet weekly, is that right?
Bi-weekly, yeah,
Bi-
alternative weeks, yeah.
Oh.
There would only be 6 that'd be eligible for co-chair, so you could do.
Yeah.
theoretically 2 months.
That's right, because one people chair, but, you know, and that, I think, to lend some transparency to what goes on in those meetings, to get more input into how the agenda is set and so forth. So I strongly recommend that you consider that. But at least get a job description for the chair and the co-chair.
On the committees. On the committees.
Talking about the full council,
So I'm
right?
talking about.
Oh,
the
you're
full
talking about
council,
full
yeah,
council,
I'm talking
right,
about the-
right.
Right, so all the town charter says is that the chair will convene the meeting and run the meeting. And so it is all by condition that there is a meeting with the town manager that takes place, that the agenda, all of that stuff. And, it's sort of treated like that's the way it has to be. And feels, so that was one thing that I came to learn, appreciate is that needs something further consideration.
And that also relates to appointments to committees and related things, so yeah, I think that's
I
a
think the
valid.
chair would like that. The chair, I would give, because the chair does all of it, and have some help, you know.
Well, yeah, and what I'm more interested in is more. There is a sense. I think, I'll just speak for myself. That. That. 5 people are left out of that transaction. Some chairs are better, others are reaching out, soliciting counsel input and so forth. But that is, you know, if you're setting the agenda.
Are you speaking specifically about the meetings with senior staff or,
Yes.
or the conversations between?
No, I'm speaking, I think, I have no issue, I mean, I think that how the chair decides to interact with the council is a matter of personal choice. And everybody has a style, and some styles, I think, proven more effective than others. What I'm really speaking about is what happens in the meeting with the town manager every other week. And to gain some more transparency, it's not a public meeting. I see the agenda when it's discussed, but you know, in 14 months, nobody's called me and said, do you have any items? You know, or even explained how I might get an item on the agenda if I wanted to. And I'm sure I could have figured it out if I did. I'm not saying that that was a barrier. But by the same token, I wouldn't point out that, you know, I've spent my career as a CEO figuring stuff out. That is not necessarily, for example, Scott's primary skill. Right? And I don't mean that with any negative at all. I'm just saying that, you know, somebody who spends their life and their career dealing with organizations and bureaucracies has a little bit of an edge relative to a guy who is representing people who live on the beach, the water, and so on and so forth. One's not better than the other. You understand what I'm saying?
I do.
Yeah. But, well, maybe not just.
We have way more.
That's exactly what I was about to say, in your favor, Scott. Okay, you have some place to go.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all of that. And I think it'll be good food for thought going forward. Yeah, so with that, I would move to adjourn.
Second.